Niehaus, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors. I'd like to welcome you to this edition of the NAFI 10 Question Challenge, the online video series where we take successful professionals in the flight instructing industry, ask them 10 questions, and see how they've leveraged their time as flight instructors for personal and professional success. Today, my guest is Greg Brown. Now, Greg is the Director of Education and Training Services for Helicopter Association International. He's been flight instructing both in the civilian and the military world since 2000, so about 21 years of experience. He's a commercial single-engine land and rotorcraft with an instrument rating, and he's a CFI II in rotorcraft. Greg, welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
We're happy to have you, and we'll jump straight into the first question. Was being a flight instructor part of your original career plan, or was it something you never anticipated doing?
Yeah, it wasn't. Probably along with everybody else. You know, as a youth, I started out, I was infatuated with the Concorde. And when I saw an aircraft and really got into aviation, I thought this is something that I wanted to do. And so my pursuit was to be, like everybody else, an airline pilot and fly that airplane. But as I go through life, you know, I discovered there are other things that are more meaningful. And one of that was being a helicopter pilot. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I had no intention of being a helicopter pilot. But during my last year at the University of Oklahoma, one of our alumni who was in the Navy flew down because he was an instructor at Pensacola and flew down to Norman, Oklahoma, where the university is, and gave the ROTC students a ride. And I was reluctant at first, but then he just said, hey, you know, you want to fly jets, that's great. Just come in a helicopter and see what you think. So I jumped in for a ride and flew, and that was the hook, because that was a 25-minute ride. I never forget it. And we landed, and that was it. My goal when I got to Pensacola was to become a helicopter pilot. I was absolutely hooked. Instructing really kind of the natural progression as you go through. You don't want to impart what you learned to everybody else. So yeah, it wasn't part of that, but especially helicopters. But that first flight in Norman, Oklahoma in '88 convinced me that, yeah, this is what I wanted to do.
Never underestimate the power of a discovery flight.
Absolutely.
So reflecting on your time as an instructor and your skill with your first student, how well do you think you did?
You know, that was, I would say, a little bit, I wouldn't say nerve-wracking per se, but I wanted to be prepared. And I wanted to make sure that I knew everything, not knew everything, but I didn't impart any bad knowledge or anything on the student. So I really, what I consider over-prepared. I made sure I knew the things that we were going to discuss before we got to the aircraft and do everything that we needed to do. So overall, I think the first one went well, but I think it was more nerve-wracking for me than the student, because this is my first time sitting with a student, and I wanted to make sure that the student knew that this wasn't some fluke sitting in the other seat. It was somebody who knew what they were doing. So I think for me, it was more nerve-wracking than the student. And from there, everything, I think, went well.
You know, it just kind of shows that you really took it professionally and wanted to do a good job.
Right. Yeah. I just really wanted to make sure that I didn't mess them up or give them any bad information. So.
Right. So most of us have had an instructor mentor who helped us learn the ropes. Who was yours, and what was the most meaningful thing they showed you?
You know, there were so many people that I learned a lot of things from. The one that really sticks out to me was I was a young pilot in the Marine Corps, and I was flying the helicopter with an instructor. I'll tell you his name because I think I learned a lot from him, Richard Chizuru. And we were flying, and as we taxied out, I was so enamored with just flying the helicopter that you know, he kind of beeped the engine back as we were taxiing out, and I didn't notice it. And so we were getting ready to take off, and I go through all the procedures, getting ready to take off. He said, stop. He said, something's not right. Take a look. And so I looked, and I go, oh, we haven't got an engine back. He said, yes. Then he looked at me and said, just because I said everything was good doesn't mean that. And he said, in God you trust, everything else you check.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept that with me ever since then. And so I've always, that's one of the things I impart on my students is, don't assume that because the person next to you is an instructor, if you see something doesn't look right, stop and ask the question and make sure that's right. I saw it, but because he said, hey, everything's good to go, and he was a senior person, had a lot more hours than I ever had, I just assumed that he knew what he was doing, and that wasn't the case. So that knowledge I impart on my students when I teach them is, make sure you check everything, and if it doesn't look right, ask the question. It doesn't hurt to ask the question.
100%. Yeah, I had an instructor who taught me something similar. He said, DTA, don't trust anyone. If you have a student and they said, hey, I checked the oil, or, hey, I checked the fuel level, go and check it yourself. And this was while I was a instructor in training. He said, just there are certain things that regardless of what somebody says, you always go and check yourself to make sure and verify.
Yeah, it's so important to do that. And sometimes when you get, especially new students, their focus is so good on learning the aircraft or helicopter that they want to fly. They're excited about doing that. And so they impart or push a lot of things off to the instructor, which is a lot of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to start teaching them to say, hey, I don't understand that. Can you explain this to me? Why is it doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Early in their careers, that it becomes natural as they progress on. So everyone's excited, and maybe the first flight or two, yes, but after that, you really need to start making sure that they're looking at everything and understanding what's going on in the aircraft, and asking questions if they don't understand anything.
And a good instructor is also able to sort of analyze the situation and find out if maybe there's something that they're not asking that you think they should be.
Right. It doesn't hurt to say, so you see anything out of the ordinary to the student, or is there something you think we should be doing? And just to get them thinking about everything as they go through.
Mm-hmm. So what is the most valuable non-aviation skill that you've learned from being a flight instructor?
The biggest one, and you've probably heard this before, communication.
Mm-hmm.
How do you communicate to the student? One thing I've learned is one size doesn't fit all. And the certain way you communicate a maneuver to one student, you may have to find a different way to communicate that to a different student. So you have to learn your students, who they are, their personality, what makes them tick, what makes them answer to certain things, and know the ways in which you have to communicate to them. And learning how to explain a maneuver to the students. And again, the same thing, the way you explain it to one, you may have to do something different and explain it to somebody else to get them to understand. So it's a challenge, but the instructor has to be the person who has great communication skills. Mm-hmm. And how do you impart that and explain maneuvers to the student? Each different student, as they would understand. One of the things that we learned as we're going through the military is, depending on where you're from, if you're doing a cross country, you see you're crossing a river. Well, it may be a river to one person, but a stream to somebody else, right, or a creek to a third. So, you've got to look and know where are your students from, what are some of the things that they see, and be able to kind of explain that. So if you're doing maneuvers and you're referencing a river, one student may be looking for this wide, big river. Another may be looking for the small thing that you consider in a river. Somebody may be looking at something else. So I have to learn how to communicate that, and then understand what your students, how they take in communication and what they think of things, to know what you can say to them so they can understand what you're trying to teach.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, sort of a piggyback on that question, did you find that your instructor technique was different from the military to when you went civilian?
There are a lot of similarities in what we do. the biggest thing when you're looking at a civilian instructing is you try to get your students to be prepared for the flight. Because again, they're paying a lot of money to learn how to fly.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get a lot more accomplished if they're prepared prior to the flight. In the military, that's part of the deal. When a student comes to the flight, we have a set of maneuvers that we're going to do, and the student has to explain those maneuvers to the instructor. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do it this way. I kind of know what they are, know the procedures.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't go anywhere without them knowing the procedures. And so then once you get out in the aircraft, you can get things done and a lot more done faster than you have to try to explain to them or do the maneuvers initially with them. If they don't know what to do before getting in the airplane, once they get in, you spend a lot more time trying to teach them what to do. But if they understand the procedures, when you get in the aircraft and you demo those procedures, then it makes sense to them because they've studied the procedures and they go, oh, okay, that's why we do it this way and that way. And then they can get through. So it's always, you try to impart your students, hey, make sure that you study the procedures and be ready when you go fly because it saves them money. So you're not rehashing things that you learned before, and they're prepared so you can get a lot more done in the time, the period that you have.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. What do you enjoy most about flight instruction?
The biggest thing is when the light comes on. It's amazing because there's certain students who sometimes they have difficulty in a maneuver or a procedure or something, and they go through and it's just not there. And then at the moment when it goes bang and it clicks, and then you see the broad smile on their face where they go, I got it. That's gratifying when you see that. It can be frustrating for the instructor at times. You're trying to figure out, what else I can do to get the student to understand.
Mm-hmm.
But all that is worth it when the light comes on and you see that big smile on the student's face and you go, yes, they got it. And then the next time you do the maneuver, it's like, yes, the light went on because now they're doing it right. So that to me is, as frustrating sometimes as it can be, when that happens, everything else you go, okay, this is why I do it.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things too. So what is your most interesting, scary, or fun story you've had operating as a flight instructor?
Wow. Going back to Marine Corps days, we had a cross-country flight with some helicopters to a training area to go do some training. And, we had like a GPS in the helicopter, and the student I had, unfortunately didn't prepare the map for sectional to know where it's going. He kind of plugged everything into the GPS and said that, the GPS is going to guide him. And I kind of noticed that. So as we took off and we had there's a flight of, I think, 5 or 6 helicopters going out, and everything was fine. And about 30 minutes into the flight, I turned off the GPS and I looked at him and said, oops, your GPS broke. And the look at his face like, oh my gosh. And so I just said, so what are we going to do? So now they have to break out the sectional, figure out where we are. And, I put a little pressure on him, like, where are we? We've got helicopters behind us. What are we going to do? What if, -1 is lost? Where are we going? So starting to see the sweat roll down his face as he's trying to pull the map out, turn it around and figure out where we are, calculate distances, get checkpoints to make sure we're on the right track. And, it's one of those lessons learned where you go, in all the technology that we have today. I mean, and it's great. Don't get me wrong. You've seen them all. And, but the bottom line is that, navigation skills still has a place in aviation,
Mm-hmm.
and just can't rely on a magenta line to guide you through. You have to be able to pick up a map or something, find out where you are in that map, correlate that to something on the ground, and go, okay, this is where I am, and navigate doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, we all have electronics, but flaws can happen in electronics, and they can go out either too hot, battery died, or something of the sort. And you have to relate. You have to be able to navigate by map. Even though people don't like it, but sectionals are still out there.
Right.
And I carry a paper copy. But again, we all use the electronic flight books. We all do. And but at the same time, you have to learn how to use that map to navigate where you are and figure out where you are to get there. So all the GPS and technology and all that's great, but don't assume it's always going to be there for you. Have that knowledge of how do I navigate via map.
Mm-hmm. Always have a backup plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in your mind, what quality or skill makes for an exceptional flight instructor?
To me, it's understanding your students and what are their goals and motivations. Why are they there? It's everyone that comes in has a different goal and what they want to do from an aviation perspective. Some just wants to come and get their private pilots, and that's it. Some want to move on to bigger and better things. What is their motivation with the students? Understanding that, so you can, because they're going to come to you and ask you for guidance in a lot of areas in what they want to do. Hey, if I want to fly air medical, what do I have to do? Well, understanding what your students' goals are and kind of knowing, what those requirements are. Even if you're not an instructor, don't know, kind of guide them to say, hey, go to so-and-so or go to this area and check those out. You may be able to get more information. Mm-hmm. But as you sit down with your student, understand what their goals and motivations are, and be ready for them to ask you these questions about career choices, career moves. But as I mentioned, some may be they just want their private to fly a helicopter and have and enjoy that aspect of flying. But others want to move on to bigger and better things, and understanding what their motivations are. You can help them in researching where they need to go, where they need to look to find out more information.
Well, it also changes your approach too, right? Like, and I've told this story before, but when I first started, I was very invested in how the 141 system works and how instruction goes in a very regimented style. And my first job was Part 61, and I tried to bring that over to the Part 61, and it just doesn't work. People aren't there for the same reasons, to your point, and so being able to sort of change your instructor style to match that student, it makes a world of difference.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and because again, as you said, everyone has a different reason for doing what they want to do. Mm-hmm. When you start flying, I'm sure you had a reason for what you wanted to do, and that changes over time. And sometimes the pilot who just wants to fly as a private pilot, as they start flying, they realize this is great. I want to fly something else. I want to fly. Now I'm thinking about flying air medical. I want to fly firefighting. I want to fly something else. So you get them once you get them in the fold, you never know what they're going to do. And, and I'm a little bit biased, but when you get in a helicopter, I'm telling you, something changes where you go, this is something different.
Yeah.
And you want to do more because it's so exhilarating when you fly the helicopter, and it's a great feeling to fly a helicopter. You're in where you are flying. It's fantastic. And so some people get there and they just, I just want my private pilots, and that's all I want to do. But once you get them in and they're like, whoa, this is great. Mm-hmm. And now they're thinking about wanting to do something else.
So what aspect of flight instruction best prepared you for what you do now?
It's great question. I think for me, it's relating and talking with people. At HAI, we have different members out there in the industry. And what we try to find is, what are your pain points? How can we, as an association, help you in your organization in answering some of those pain points? What are some of the things we do? And, we have vast experience at HAI with people from different areas who do a great job in helping our members. And I think that for me, learning how to understand different students and what their needs are, learning how to ask some of the right questions and trying to figure out what are the needs are, it kind of helped me a little bit from the training side in trying to find out what are the pain points from an educational standpoint that we can help you with. Are there areas that you're suffering in, or just doesn't have the right needs that we can provide help to you. The biggest thing also is, as an association, again, we have so many members across the spectrum and internationally, and each of them have different areas that they need help in. And so understanding what those are and trying to help them answer those questions, I think is what I bring to the table. And I try my best to make sure that we get the right education, either online or at Heli Expo, and what we can do from a training standpoint. And we have a lots of good resources at HAI that people can come to and get those answers. But for me, it's just being an instructor before and understanding different students, different people, and how to relate to them, and in cultivating the relationships with people. This is what I bring, and cultivating relationships with some of our members out there to find out what are the things that that are hurting and how can we answer those pain points for them.
Mm-hmm. So the same kind of techniques you used on your students to get a little more information and find out what they needed, you're using on the members.
Right. Right.
So how did you utilize your time as a CFI to then transition into what you professionally do now?
Yeah, it goes back to when I left instructing in the Marine Corps. I went to the Marine Corps Training and Education Command, and I kind of did a lot of what are the training aspects for the Marine Corps as a whole, and worked in that arena, and from there transitioned into this. So you go from instructing, understanding the instructional area, what are the needs are from an adult learner. You take that to the basis of how you develop the courses, how you work through those courses. And now I bring that here where we can try to work through what our members' needs are and develop courses that meet those needs for them.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Final question. So if you could give a new instructor any piece of advice for success in the profession, what would it be?
Be true to yourself. Be true to yourself, and be true to your students. Sometimes the student instructor combination just doesn't work, and we have to be adult enough, as I call it, to say, you know what, maybe we need to get you a different instructor because I'm not getting through to you. It's nothing bad in anybody. Sometimes that relationship there just doesn't work. And you have to understand that and not try to fight it, because then you're getting into areas where instead of focusing on what's going on in the aircraft, you're trying to focus on what's going on personally inside the aircraft. And so it's not a bad thing to say, you know what, I'm probably not the best instructor for you. And we may need to recommend you to somebody else who may be able to get you where you need to go, because we're just not coming together. So, sometimes that's a hard thing to do and say, and so people don't like saying that. But as an instructor, you have to understand that, because no matter what, that person, what they learned from you, they're taking forward for the rest of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's just so adversarial or just not, you just don't come together as a team, then maybe that's just not the right way to go. And maybe this needs a different instructor. And sometimes when we think a person is just not cut out for aviation, it may be that the instructor-student relationship is just not there. And we need to try something else before we say that person is not cut out for aviation.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's just the instructor-student personality. But always, 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 be cognizant of that as an instructor. And if it's just you've gone 4 or 5 flights and you're just not getting through to the student, then maybe it's time to say, hey, maybe I need to have somebody else fly with the student to see if it's just my instructional technique that's not working, or if it's the student. And that way you give the student every opportunity to learn how to fly the helicopter, vice to say, nah, he just can't fly. Maybe it's just that personality.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great advice. And it's a really good experience here because so often I think there's a common misconception that what rotorcraft instructors go through is different than what single engine or multi-engine land aircraft go through. And what your answers have kind of proven is that the trials and tribulations that a rotorcraft instructor goes through isn't that much different. We're not that much different. We all utilize kind of the same set of skills and have the same sort of trials and tribulations.
Yeah, I mean, our maneuvers are different. That's about it.
Mm-hmm.
But from an instructional standpoint, in how you instruct, it's relatively the same. You have to make sure that you're getting your point across to the student. How you explain a maneuver to the student. How do you judge whether the student is getting the process, the procedures down? How far do you let a student go in flying before you say, I've got controls?
Mm-hmm.
And there are other things that, as an instructor, one of the things that I've done where the weather was kind of and I wanted the student to kind of make that decision: are we going to fly or we're not? And we'll sit down and I'll brief the flight that we're going to. They'll bring up a weather brief. We'll look at it. And then, they'll go out, you'll start the pre-flight on the helicopter. We'll finish all the pre-flight, go through all the steps. Now, looking at the weather, I know I'm not going to fly,
Right.
But I wanted to see how far, and so we got in, sat in, strapped in, getting ready to go. And I just said, okay, that's it. Let's go back inside. And we sat down and we talked about it, and again, that was, while I was in the Marine Corps. But it's one of those things where you want the students to learn that, well, this is kind of where, look at the weather. Is it really what we need to go fly in? What's your experience in this kind of weather? Everything, take a look at all that stuff before you make the decision to fly. And again, it's different from the military to civilian because, again, instructors' time is valuable and students are paying a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think these little things of, we're trying to teach them decision making.
Right.
How do you make proper decisions, in whether you fly or not? Inadvertent IMC is a big thing. And we at HAI, we just finished up 56 seconds to safety that a student can take. And I think it's good for students and instructors to really take a look at that course to kind of see how things can deteriorate rather rapidly when you think that, I've got enough space to go. Learn how to make those decisions. And again, that's when I talked about a student early on in their lessons, start teaching them these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's tough from a civilian standpoint to kind of have a student come in, go out to the helicopter, pre-flight, sit in there and say, no, we're not going to fly, and explain why those decisions were made and go through the weather brief, everything else, looking at forecasts, and help them understand that, when you make those decisions, you have to look further out than just the next 10, 15 minutes, or just because you stayed in the local pattern doesn't mean that you're safe to go and fly.
Mhm.
It's just not. And sometimes as instructors, we may just say, yeah, it's good to go. We can go out and do this and that. To me, we're setting a bad example, because if we're saying it's good enough to go do certain things,
Mhm.
then that's what we're teaching the student. And so now when you're not there and the student has their license, the next thing, oh, it's good enough to go do this. And then they get in trouble.
Mhm.
So we have to set the example earlier on for the students.
There's so much more that goes into flight instruction beyond just teaching how to fly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, the biggest one right now is decision making,
Yeah.
and making that determination if you're going to fly or not, and start teaching the students how their personal limits. We all talked about it. We all have personal limits. And as an instructor, ours is a little bit higher than the student, but we can't teach a student to our limit. We have to come down and figure out what the student's limits are. And that's where we have to start.
Mhm.
And we can help build that limit with the student, but we can't bring them to our limit that quickly. That's not right.
Mhm. Mhm. Now, I'm glad you mentioned 56 seconds to safety, because that is an amazing video that you guys at HAI have come up with. If I'm an instructor and I haven't seen it yet, where would I find that?
If you go to rota.org and then go to the online academy, you'll find the 56 seconds there on our learning management system. And it's one of the first courses you'll see. And I think it's an excellent course. And if they can't find it, they can contact me and I'll guide them to it. But it's absolutely critical, I think, for an instructor to take a look at that course,
Mhm.
and students as well, but instructors mostly, to go take a look at that course and see, when you look at it, you'll be amazed at how, yeah, it's kind of skosh, but we've all flown something similar to that before and got away with it. And that's the
Right.
key. That we got away with it, so we think that we can do it again. And what this teaches us is, you may get away with it once, possibly twice, but three strikes are out.
Right. Right up
And
into the end.
so, yeah, you have to make that decision early enough to say, nah, this is not time to go fly. So rota.org, go to the online academy education site, you'll find it, and it's right there.
Amazing video, regardless of what type of airframe you fly. Highly encourage everybody to watch it. Now, lastly, if I were a rotorcraft instructor looking to get more information on HAI, you want to do a quick plug?
Yeah, go to rota.org. We have a lot of great information on what we do here at HEI. Lots of changes coming. If you can attend Heli Expo in 2022, it's going to be in Dallas, the early part of March, 8th, 9th, and 10th there in Dallas. Come on down. We have a lot of good classes available. For attendees, our Rota Safety Challenge presentations are free for attendees to come. We have a number of excellent paid courses for professional education courses that happens a few days prior to the expo starting. And those will be coming up online here really soon. So again, check out rota.org. You see all the courses and everything that we have to offer. And we also have what we call the manufacturer's technical briefings. And we have a lot of the OEMs give briefings on certain platforms. And so you can get Bell, Airbus, Leonardo, Sikorsky, and all the engine manufacturers to boot are all there to give some presentations. So even if you're not a maintenance technician, you can come back and learn what's going on within the OEMs and the airframes that are out there to fly. So lots of great information. We have lots of things in HAI that we're doing. We have a weekly webinar that goes every week on Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern. That has a lot of great and excellent information there. So, so great things on rota.org. Please, 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 I advise everybody, if you can, check it out. HAI we're making some changes. We're moving forward, and you'll be excited some of the things that we're doing. So great things are coming from HAI. Be ready for it. But check it out yourself on rota.org and come to Heli Expo. I'll be there, and come find me, and we can talk some more.
Fantastic. HAI is a great friend of NAFI. We love everything you guys are doing. We can't wait to see more. And Greg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks. I appreciate it, John. Glad to do it. Glad to be here.